Everyone, welcome to my talk. I'm Dean Wiseman. I've been a member of the NSS for approximately 25 years, and I'm here to talk to you today about the exploration and survey of caves in what's known as the Tiger Cave system in the Phong Nha Kabong National Park, Vietnam. Some of the photos that you're going to see today and some of the information I'm going to talk about spans from last year, but most of what I'm going to talk about today comes from a trip that we did in March that involved a partnership between Jungle Boss, which is an outfitter that in the Phong Nha region, and the National Speleological Society. I want to thank them for their generous support to help us obtain some equipment that greatly enhanced our expedition. And if I were to include a quote about this expedition, I would say Frank Herbert from his famous book Dune, a beginning is a very delicate time. And this is a beginning for us. This was, to my knowledge, at least I've been told this, is one of the very first American-led expeditions to this region. Up until this time, the area has been predominantly explored by British survey and exploration teams. So we're one of the first American teams to be invited to do some exploration and discovery. I am going to make a quick presumption that the majority of this audience is American, not to insult any of our non-American audience, but that most of the folks who are watching this are from the United States. We do have a perspective about Vietnam, and one of my goals with this talk today is to expand that perspective. Vietnam is a tremendous country that I've come to love, and hopefully will get to visit many years into the future. It's absolutely a sensory delight in terms of your eyes and the smells, the food, and the culture is just magnificent. And these are just examples of some of the photos that I personally took in 2019 when I first got a chance to visit Vietnam. All of these photos were taken from in the Da Nang region, Hoi An, or between Da Nang and Hoi An. So again, like I said, a sensory overload. And there is a deep cultural history here that is not only Vietnamese but also Chinese. Certainly we have the cultural aspects of communism and the history of communism versus the democracy that we enjoy in the United States. Vietnam has undergone a significant economic transformation following sort of the opening of the economy. It's very much an entrepreneurial-oriented society now, and not the least of which is his outstanding coffee. They have wonderful coffee growers there, and you can get coffee farm to table in Vietnam. That's one of the real pleasures there. I would also be remiss if I didn't take some time to thank a dear friend of mine, Stephen Fry, for introducing me to this country. Stephen came to know Vietnam through some contacts in the United States and has an active exploration project that he invited me on, and that was the reason that I came over to Vietnam in the first place in 2019, was to assist with that project. However, this project has grown legs, and now we are talking about doing much more than this initial project. That's certainly ongoing, but the opportunities here have expanded, and it would be unfair of me to not thank Stephen. He's originally from Idaho and now spends about half a year in Vietnam assisting Jungle Boss and doing cave exploration. Pretty amazing stuff. Thank you, Steve. The focus of our expedition and exploration efforts centers in an area called the Phong Nha Kabong National Park, which is almost equidistant between Da Nang, which is not shown, it's right here, and Hanoi. In 2019, we flew into Da Nang and then drove up to Phong Nha. This time around in 2020, we pretty much all went to Hanoi and then made our way to Phong Nha. It's right on what we call the demilitarized zone, or the former demilitarized zone, between northern and southern Vietnam. Khe Sanh is not far from here. Much of the trail and the cave that we're on was part of the original Ho Chi Minh Trail during the war. Like many cultures throughout history, the Vietnamese culture enjoys a very intense relationship with caves. Caves are very, very important cultural, historical, and religious purposes, and it's not uncommon when you're in and around major metropolitan areas that any nearby caves have been adapted for cultural and or religious purposes. This is an example of an area called the Marble Mountain, which is just south of but you can find these areas all over the country because karst does exist in many, many areas of the country, particularly in the central and northern areas of Vietnam. And it's a really interesting experience to walk through caves and find these cultural sites and see how people utilize caves in different ways. I've seen this commonality all around the world. Despite this intense relationship with people in caves and in the modification of caves for cultural and religious purposes, nevertheless, with the economic development of the nation, there has also been an ecological sensitivity movement going in the society. The government actually has formal policies about sustainability and is actively working to develop the resources in a sustainable way. And this sign shows a very, very good example of this, that in and around Marble Mountain with the caves, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. There is an ecologic sensitivity in the region that is gaining increasing economic importance, and that's one of the motifs of our expedition, was to assist the people of Phong Nha in developing their resources in a sustainable and ecologically minded way in terms of the caves. As you're driving into the town or the village of Phong Nha, you're struck by the coastal flatlands that are rice paddies that smell lovely in the spring. You can smell the jasmine in the rice as you're riding your motorcycle or bicycle. And as you approach Phong Nha from the east, you enter this gap that I'm showing right here. There's a sign that says Phong Nha Kabong because this is the edge of the Phong Nha Kabong National Park. The park encompasses a large segment of the Kabong Massif of limestone. Very, very old karst formations, enormous, enormous caves, including some of the largest in the world. Traditionally in this area, you have people that either subsist on farming or on resources that are found in the jungle that can include timber, that can also include animals and food products from the jungle. And what we're seeing in this region is a transition. They've come to understand that their resources are quite unique, and the local government, as well as the outfitters and the people in the area, are beginning to learn that they can they can do much better economically by protecting these resources rather than exploiting them. So many of the people that we hired for our expedition were former timber people, former hunters who would live and harvest animals for either food or for trade purposes. And so we're hoping that by our participation here, we can begin to encourage other forms of ways that would allow the jungle to thrive and allow them to benefit from that jungle thriving. And even if there weren't caves in the area, Phong Nha is a tremendous place to visit. It's a combination of Christian and native religions, Buddhism. It is a crossroads of cultures, not only in terms of world culture, but also in terms of Vietnamese culture. You have many different types of ethnicities in the region, and so Phong Nha is a very diverse village in that respect. And there is a growing ecotourism aspect to the area. They have known for some time that the caves are relatively special. So there are a number of caves that have already been developed for commercial tourism, including some of these water caves that you can take boats in, and more of the sort of traditional commercial tourist type caves like you would see at Mammoth Cave or Wyandotte Cave or so forth. Also in the area, in addition to the ecotourism, there is food tourism, cooking class, gardening, organic, so forth. And you find any number of what are called homestays in this region, which make this a very family-friendly place. And people often come to Phong Nha region, not for the caves, but for the cuisine and for the organic lifestyle. And Jungle Boss is part of that. Jungle Boss certainly offers adventure tours out in the jungle for the caves and so forth, but also offers homestays and resort type furnishings for people who would like a little more peace and quiet, if you will. The past 15 or 20 years have literally been revolutionary in terms of the Phong Nha Kabong National Park, especially with the discovery of what is known as Hang Son Doong or Sundung Cave, a tremendous cave now considered to have the largest single room by volume in the world. And it certainly attracted international attention and demand to visit this cave. But it is even though it is the biggest and certainly extremely photogenic, it is by no means the only, or even, in my opinion, the most spectacular of the caves here. Each of the caves is different and has different things to contribute, just like any of the other great caving regions that we visit as cavers. The Kabong Massif spans Vietnam and Laos. On the Vietnamese controlled part of the Kabong Massif, there are approximately, if I recall correctly, somewhere around 80 to 100 known caves of various sizes, including the truly massive Hang Son Doong, Sundung Cave. Our group was involved over here in a different watershed known as the Tiger Cave system. That involves several caves. It's not quite as contiguous as the Phong Nha system is, or much less Sundung, but nevertheless several significant caves, including the fourth and sixth largest rooms by volume, which I will be showing you a few pictures of later on. So our efforts focused on the Tiger Cave system, and in this area in particular, around Pygmy Cave, Tiger Cave, and Over Cave, along with a new Doline that hooks into Tiger Cave, the Doline known as Kong. This map here is the product of surveys completed by a British team of cavers who've been visiting since the 1990s. They created these grade 4 level surveys, and just because of the immensity of the resource that we're talking about, and certainly the discovery of Sundung, have been relatively quiet since the early 2000s. And it's only been recently that activity has picked up in this area again with Jungle Boss and developing tours for these caves, and then doing some initial exploration that gave us the inspiration. This Kong area over here, this is the Kong Doline, or the Kong, shall we say, it's more than a Doline. It's a karst complex. It certainly involves a Doline, but it also involves other features and caves as well. This has recently been sort of reinvigorated in interest from a commercial standpoint, but there were so many opportunities. We felt that this provided an extraordinary opportunity for new discovery, and that's why we were interested in coming to Kong. The week that we were there, we did a few days of exploration here, along with some work in the massive attack area, which I'll be talking about later in the presentation, and some assistance with safety and commercial sustainability here in Pygmy Cave in a traverse area that involves ropes. But we hope eventually lead to additional survey and exploration, because this cave, while it has been mapped in the main trunk passage, offers tremendous possibility for additional survey. These are photos of what is known as the Kong Doline that I mentioned in the previous slide. When I first saw these photos taken from a drone that they flew over not long after they decided to begin running tours into the area, I thought the Doline was pretty much this area right here, what you can see from the bottom. So these photos are actually 180 degrees in terms of orientation. They're taking a photo from down here on the left, looking this way, and it looks very circumscribed. It looks very much like one of the big sotenos that you might find in Mexico or China or something. And I thought the Doline was basically comprised by this area that you could see, and I could never be more wrong. What we are seeing here is really a corner of the Doline with a large karst block of limestone in the middle of it. This actually is a talus pile that you cross over, and all of this area that you can see in this photo, and I could show you more photos, is a much, much, much larger area. It's many, many hundreds of acres with just tremendous cave potential. We guesstimate from the bottom of this central pit, which is where the water is that you come through from the Great Saudi Cave, to the top is over 1,000 feet. And one of our initial goals was to try to make our way up this fin, which is more difficult than it might seem, get up on this fin and try to rappel down in here to ascertain the precise vertical extent. And we were unsuccessful in that. The eye here of Kong, the right eye, and this is this left eye over here, the right eye of Kong, we did develop a through trip and a rappel down through here that's well over 700 feet tall. So we know that there's, it's a very, very tall system. And this area, these areas remain unexplored and offer some significant vertical as well as cave potential. Tremendous, tremendous area, very beautiful, nearly pristine, lots of bats, flying foxes, a really, really neat place to camp. And this was our base camp for 4 days on our expedition. Now I'm going to skip a few days of our trip because the first day or 2 or 3, depending on when people arrived, was spent in Hanoi, which is a wonderful, wonderful city. But where I'm going to begin is on our journey into the jungle and on our way to Kong. From Phong Nha, we loaded up a team of 12 cavers and a team of roughly 10 to 12 porters. Not all porters stayed every day. We actually swapped some porters out for supply purposes. Being 5 days in the jungle is a relatively supply-intensive situation. And so we drove approximately 20 miles up the highway towards the Laotian border on the ridge, and were dropped off at this spot in the jungle. Everybody was excited, and it was fun because virtually nobody had been to Vietnam before except for me and one other person, and this other person hadn't been to this region. So as we were driving in our buses, everybody was craning their necks looking at the tremendous karst. But we got to the drop-off site, everybody geared up, and it was an approximately 6-7 hour hike from our drop-off point to Kong, which not only included several kilometers of hiking, but also approximately 400-500 yards of swimming. Out there is challenging. It is it's a significant hike over very, very steep terrain at times through the jungle, relatively warm period of the year, thankfully dry. This is the dry season. March is the dry season, so we didn't see very many mosquitoes, relatively few bugs at all, and certainly no rain, so that was a blessing because this terrain is fairly challenging when you're carrying a 35 to 45 pound pack on your back. The porters really helped out because they helped us with team gear and supplies. And the porters really were instrumental. One of the issues that we had with our team is that being new to this region, a lot of people fell back into their comfort zones about how much gear they were going to bring, what kind of gear they were going to bring, and that often led to weight issues. Going back, one of the things I'm going to stress is pack as light as you possibly can. Don't just fall back on your habits. Find gear that you can bring and or then you don't have to take home. Very, very light gear that's good for one expedition. Because we're not out in the weather all that much. Really, the issue is weight and safety as we're moving over terrain. And the fact that we had porters with us really did make it possible to bring gear that we probably wouldn't have been able to bring otherwise. They even brought a generator along with it, and so we had plenty of energy out in the jungle. Didn't need to bring a lot of batteries. We weren't actually camping in dark conditions all the time. We actually had surprisingly little need for extra batteries. You certainly need batteries for the caving trips, but many people brought more batteries than they actually needed. And in addition to the amazing ecology and biology of the trail, you can also occasionally get fortunate enough to see some of the historical artifacts like leftover gun barrels from the war. Many of the caves were used as bomb shelters to various degrees. One of the caves, Pygmy Cave, an entire village moved into the one entrance of the cave in order to avoid bombing, because the Ho Chi Minh Trail was intensely bombed during the war, and so many of the jungle people used caves as a way of avoiding injury or death from the bombing campaigns. After hiking across the jungle for about 6 or so kilometers for about 5.5 hours, we finally approached the dry riverbed entrance of the Great Saudi Cave. There's a sandy riverbed here. We changed into our swimsuits, we filled up the boats, and you swim from this entrance. This is entirely water-filled passage with the exception of a big breakdown bank that's a connection to the Kong Doline, which is not only just this circle here, it extends a way much larger area, but we're going to call this area, this work area that we spent 4 days, the Kong Doline. So here's a photo of us walking. It was a real pleasure to get out of the jungle and onto some sandy terrain, and on a hot day we were really excited about swimming. The water was a little chillier than we anticipated, but when it's 90 degrees out and you've been sweating all day, 70 to 75 degree water feels pretty nippy. And so you get into this cave and you find the big passage and you swim through for about 10 or 15 minutes, roughly 400 to 500 yards, and then you pop out in the base of the Kong Doline. And that was the base here this is where we swam out of, and that's where we set up camp. This was our camp kitchen area. This was the boat that we purchased with the NSS International Exploration Grant, and tents in and around this area. A beautiful, beautiful place to camp. Our exploration and survey goals for the Kong Doline region were threefold. We had 12 people, so we tried to split up into 3 teams of 4. One team was going to try to get into this unexplored area, this eye of Kong, called this the left eye of Kong, either by finding some route up along the wall or perhaps moving around and up through this valley up here. All of this remains unexplored to our knowledge. The other team, in a sort of a pincher movement, was going to move up and around the other flank up onto this right here, which is actually a relatively narrow fin of rock that extends off of the head of Kong here. A very, very narrow fin of rock, with the idea that we would try to get up to this point and ascertain the actual vertical depth of this head wall down to the base of Kong. We were unsuccessful in doing that, and what we did as Plan B was establish the through trip and the canyoneering style route through the right eye. The third team was going to stay in the valley immediate, the Kong's mouth, if you will, Kong's nose, and do a survey inventory of the karst features, setting up a base point of reference for the survey that could be either extended into the cave if necessary, connected into previous survey, and serve as a basic reference point for any features that might be found in this area. And as it would happen, this third team was far and away the most successful in terms of discovery. This first team actually did find a connection with the Tiger Cave system, which is running roughly over in this area with the from over here. Originally, the Saudi Cave connected underneath in here, inside this head region, and now we have a second connection. So that was the other team was pretty successful in that respect. The first project I'm going to talk about was the group that was trying to swing around to the left and get up on the fin to ascertain the depth of the high head wall. We weren't unfortunately able to make it to the top of that fin. We elected to not follow the climber's way the first time. It was a little bit exposed. We weren't quite sure we could make that climb, and we thought we could probably find another simpler route to the top, but we were unsuccessful. So what we ended up doing was utilizing our equipment to establish a canyoneering route from the cave at the top of the fin. And this is in a cave, and you could argue technically that this window right here is actually about a 400 or 500 foot cave entrance. Because you do pass through a cave passage, and it's obvious that this cave had been used for many years, probably by indigenous people and or monkeys. Very much the polish on the stones in and around this alcove. But we set anchors and fixed rope, and we're able to complete the canyoneering. We're going to call it canyoneering, even though in my mind it does involve caving. And so we were able to successfully complete and rig and rappel that canyoneering route from these high alcoves. There are a couple of different alcoves. There's a highest balcony, then there's a middle alcove, and there is opportunity for some other caves should anyone feel inclined to do a little bit of technical traversing. There is some potential in some of these chambers and leads in this stone. Spectacular fossilized coral in this region, some of the best fossilized coral that I've ever seen. Really remarkable, though it meant some challenging bolting because the fossilized coral is not ideal for setting bolts. But we were successful, and even though I've been fortunate enough to have been rappelling all over the United States, California, and Yosemite, and Tag, and so forth, this rappel at the top rate is one of the most spectacular I've ever done. This is the view just taken not too long ago by Stephen Fry on a commercial trip that is now was successful in rigging and doing the canyoneering route. And this is the view you have when you're on rope or just have reached the first major vegetated ledge down below. So there's one good free drop that's spectacular at the top. Then you have to kind of do an angular rappel down into a gully, a little bit of traversing, and then the final rappel is actually quite nice. So this is the view from the balcony down, and that's the first ledge down below, and you can see that it's heavily vegetated. And so the original team of Stephen and Ujang Zhang elected to go this way down the ledge. The canyoneering route now circles around the other way into a gully that then empties out right above the base camp. And here's the view of part of the final rappel. The final rappel actually extends up another 30 or 40 feet above this. It's a spectacular finish, and it's mostly free hanging once you've hit this lip right here, right down to within 100 feet of base camp. A truly spectacular route in both in terms of caving and canyoneering. Our next part of the slideshow is going to involve the discovery of a new significant cave in the Kong Doline that we named Python. If you remember, King Kong fights a battle with a very, very large snake, and we wanted to name this cave something appropriate in the theme of Kong. But we also named it because we happened during our days in the Kong Doline have two pythons visit us by virtue of falling out of a tree or off of a cliff into the campsite, and they both seemed to survive. So we named the discovery Python Cave. So with the map here, first of the Great Saudi Cave that we swam through and we saw earlier, and the Tiger Cave system that we see here. Here's the Kong Doline over here. I'm going to draw in a couple of drip lines for some of the rock face areas of that Doline. The party that was involved in the karst inventory was marking major karst features within the Doline when they uncovered an area of that looked like a potential cave entrance down here, not far from the bottom of the rappel out of that Kong's Eye that I was just showing you. At first it looked like it was a lead, and then a couple other explorers decided to check it out. So discovery kind of falls with Carl Pierce and Sharon Shearling. They went in a couple of body lengths and identified it as a strong lead. And then Rand Hazlett and Laura Demarest and Eric Edelman decided to go survey this, and they found a significant discovery out in this area, which is not shown. And this is just drawn in fancifully. This was just my recollection because we have the notes, we just haven't translated them yet into actual survey. At the end of the week, we did find an additional connection. Robbie Jones explored a couple of entrances up in an alcove up above that ended up dropping down and connecting with the original survey, a displacement of more than 35 feet. So there's some up and down here that's not depicted, but leads to major cave. In my own mind, I haven't added up the numbers, but it would be in the 1,500 2,000 foot range that's already been surveyed during the week. Both entrances to the cave are relatively small relative to the inside passages later on. Through breakdown and canyon passage that's somewhat fractured. What you see here are examples of the limestone that we were moving through. Very, very interesting stuff. It's known as the Bokson Formation. It's amalgamated. It's even somewhat metamorphosized in its character. So it can take a high polish, but yet still can form passages. It's the strength of the rock is partly why they believe that that some of these absolutely immense passages can form. And the canyon proceeds through this sort of, breakdown, high energy crawl, and eventually comes to a vertical slot that you drop down approximately 15 feet or so into more river-like passage. And so here is Sharon and Carl doing some of the initial survey in this canyony breakdown boneyard kind of passageway. Eventually, though, it drops down, becomes increasingly more decorated. You see more flowstone, more formations, and you drop into this enormous. I guess you wouldn't call it river. It's stream passage. It has an intermittent stream that gets more and more permanent the further down you go. Heavily decorated with enormous formations, some 20 meters tall. Very, very highly decorated, beautiful area. With evidence of some rare species, including cave crabs. The carapace from a cave crab was noted just as you made the connection from the canyon into the stream passage. In other caves in the area, we've actually seen live cave crabs. They're rare and endangered. We also found in the lake a significant population of blind fish. in the pools, and then the lake that we turned around at the downstream end of this passage. It terminates in standing water. There wasn't much flow noted. Folks did kind of go in there, and it seems to sump, but further exploration is definitely merited in this area, as the passage is large enough and complicated enough that it could very easily, we could find a workaround. So following a very successful 4 days in Kong, which just left us with nothing but more to do, we were trying to establish a toehold, and we found nothing but leads and leads and more leads and more leads. We reluctantly left Kong. Now, I knew what the rest of the team was in for, so I was quite excited. But the rest of the team wasn't quite as excited because they didn't know. But we swam out of Kong to this area right here, went through the Noodles for Breakfast connection, and then exited the swift exit of Tiger Cave. The other team that I didn't mention in the previous slides actually had established a connection probably through either here or here. We're not entirely sure yet, but had seen the swift exit and was already excited about that. Little did they know what they had in store for them after we exited the swift exit. And so on our 4th day, we had a combination of transit and preliminary exploration. I would love to say that we bagged some more survey. We just didn't have the time to do that at this point, but we do have some fantastic leads that had been explored previously, but we established where they are, and we have a strong set of leads that we would like to go visit. So we transited out of Tiger Cave through the Karst Valley over to Hangover or Over Cave. Through Hangover, we did some exploration and lead checking here in the massive attack area. There was a very, very large, enormous pit here that hadn't been descended previously. But on a previous commercial trip, another lead had been found, and so one team was involved in doing the descent in massive attack in the pit. The other small team followed one of the guides down to the other lead to see what that was about. To make a long story short, we found an underground river that is absolutely. And here we are exiting the Tiger Cave system. You can see the immensity of the entrance by the people here, and that entire passage reflects the dimensions that we see here in the entrance. Easily 20 to 30 meter ceiling height, 75 to 100 meter width for many, many hundreds of meters once you pop out of the connection passages from the Great Saudi Cave. Truly spectacular. From there, we crossed a karst valley, the Doline, probably a collapse from when this passage and the Tiger Cave passage were connected. This is the one of the entrances to Over Cave or Hangover, and you can see even the entrance tells you about some of the scale of the formations in this cave. Truly spectacular, one of the great chambers I've ever visited in terms of size and diversity of formations, and that includes places like Lechagia and so forth. This area is known as part of what's called massive attack, a tremendous, tremendous chamber. Those of you who might have been to Lechagia, if you've ever been to the ABC room, it would be on par with the size, probably bigger than the ABC room, Western Borehole kind of thing. Lots and lots of enormous rimstone, tremendous flowstone, and certainly speleothems, and not completely explored, certainly not completely surveyed. Our outfitters, Le Ludung, Jungle Boss, told us about another room that was not been surveyed yet. That's as large, that is on par with massive attack. So certainly plenty to do from a survey standpoint. Here's our map again of the cave system. Again, we were spending our time over here in Kong for a few days, and now we've transited to massive attack area of Hangover Cave and descending this large pit in exploration. To make a long story short, we found an enormous river system transiting underneath in this approximate direction. That includes an additional entrance. There's a Doline, I believe, is here. I could be 180 degrees wrong. It might be popping out over here. We haven't done any survey yet. This was originally explored by a client on one of the Jungle Boss trips, who was a caver. And we just followed up that initial exploration to see what all was involved in terms of survey. We swam across the river and popped right towards what we could see light, and we popped up into a fairly large collapse entrance that actually had an additional cave. My suspicion is that this river, and it is enormous, we could see several hundred feet in both directions, is connected to the water that we saw in Python and eventually see in Tiger and so forth. I think it's part of the overall river system flowing through here. If not, that would be incredibly interesting. We left this area somewhat reluctantly. I would have loved to have spent another day or so doing survey here with two very promising survey leads for the future, not only in terms of the passage within Hangover, but we also found an additional cave entrance with a pit just outside that's connected to the Doline on one side. Pit looks to be in the order of 40 to 50 feet deep, looks like it's going somewhere. And if it is in this part, or even if it's over in this part of the map, if I'm 180 degrees wrong, still represents a potential for breakout capacity in areas that we don't know of any cave. So pretty exciting stuff. The last cave that we visited, and we actually overnighted it near the far entrance of this cave, is called Pygmy, which currently possesses what is believed to be the fourth largest room in the world, underground cave chamber in the world. A truly special entrance with evidence of violent flooding from a cyclone that struck Vietnam a few years back. This tree in particular, which looks like a little toothpick here, is easily larger than some of the 100-year-old trees in my backyard, and there are thousands of them. This landslide washed in, speaking to the volume of water that this cave can take. And what's more interesting is that the commercial route through the cave goes this way. So the big room is down over here on the right. You traverse across and to the right. All of that water goes down to the left and is, to my knowledge, unexplored. So assuming that you're not going to have any violent floods, some tremendous cave potential. And again, you can see that box zone type of sort of semi-metamorphosized limestone, which can suspend these enormous rooms. This is a photo I took during our work project where we were helping establish additional anchor points for the traverse. You have to cross over this thing called the dinosaur spine or the dragon spine in order to get to the far end of the cave. This is Rand Hazlett about 7 or 8 minutes away from me, shining his light back. The light that Captain Ujai Zhang, he's holding there, throws about 200,000 lumens, and you're only seeing the upper half of 1/5 of the volume of this room. A truly just stupendous room. So we were up here rigging some additional anchor points for the traverse ropes to help facilitate folks transiting through this area. Again, there's tremendous unexplored potential down below. We were secretly hoping that we could drop a rope down and take a peek around, but just didn't have the time for it. At the far end of the cave, near the campsite at the far end, you get to see some just truly amazing old rimstone formations. The dimensions are easily 150 meters wide, 100 meters to 150 meters tall, and just an enormous chamber. with much potential. We didn't do any real lead checking in this cave. I just wanted to introduce this cave to my team, so we spent the final night enjoying this true gem of a cave. So here's our cave kitchen. We would have communal meals every night. I didn't really talk about that in the previous part of the presentation, but that was one of also the fun parts, is that it was a very communal experience. We would have dinners where we would all sit around together and talk, and there was hardly a time when you didn't hear somebody laughing. That was one of the real joys of the trip, not only between the cave members, but also between cave members and the porter team and so forth. This is the view from up high of that far entrance. You can see our tents and the campsite and kitchen and so forth. This is the area that had been where the village had moved in during the bombing, and there is some cultural evidence on some of the stalagmites that are covered with moss and so forth from previous habitation. You can also see bamboo works up on the sides of the chamber, where hunters had gone up to collect birds and eggs. Some of the bamboo works were just absolutely breathtaking. You can see some of the bamboo works right here, I believe. Maybe you can, if you look closely, you might see some here, but you can see the people down in. So this is walking out of Pygmy Cave. Some of them, our team there, walking up out of this Doline back to our bus rendezvous point. So we were down in this area doing our trail and safety work. I'm going to zoom this in for you for better or for worse. But there are tremendous leads remaining in this cave. I would really like to be able to go and explore where that water went during that landslide initially over in the Doline entrance. Certainly some low, down climbs, rappels down into a lower area of the cave. If the water that we found in Hangover is also involved in this cave, there stands to be some tremendous trunk river type passage below that rivals some of what we see in the upper area, the paleo area of the cave. So in summary, for our goals and accomplishments, we were able to get started on this survey. We were able to initiate an inventory and exploration of the karst features in and around the Kong Doline. We were able to find a new cave and begin documenting it. And hopefully by next summer we'll have a nice map to show you at the cartography salon. We were able to develop additional recreational resources for Jungle Boss in the form of a canyoneering / through trip in that spectacular unnamed cave up above the Kong entrance. We established that there are legitimate and significant unsurveyed resources in Hangover as well as in Pygmy Cave, with a great deal of survey and exploration yet to be done. So we facilitated the current trip through the cave with the commercial operations, but there are certainly major leads there that we want to follow up on. And lastly, it was our hope that by being good stewards and being good participants on this trip, we could lay a long-term relationship groundwork with the authorities who manage the Phong Nha Kabong National Park and Quang Binh Province in Vietnam, so that Americans and particularly NSS members can go over and participate in exploration and survey along the lines of the mission of the National Speleological Society. And that's our trip, and I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes thanking the participants who we had from all over the country join in and help us on this trip. It was an absolutely marvelous group to be a part of. Lots of great times. We got through the tough times together. a diverse set of skills, an individual set of skills that made this trip such a success. I think highly everybody brought something, and that was what made the trip really, really special. I would be remiss in not thanking Jungle Boss and their awesome, awesome crew of porters and cooks and guides and photographers. They represent the very best that Vietnam has to offer in terms of hospitality, friendship, and in a mutual investment in mission. They're committed to sustainable and progressive cave exploration, and I want to thank Lei Lu Dong. We call him Boss. He is the jungle boss, and his first mate U Jang Jong, who is the captain. He's very much has a history in the jungle, and he has a lot of knowledge, and is very happy to share that knowledge with people. I learned so much from Captain. And Leo is just a bag of laughs. He's a very fun guy to be around, and it's fun to see the joy in his face. He was able to get the proper skills and training, and was able to do the canyoneering route. And I've never seen a bigger smile on anyone's face in my life. And a hard working crew. It was great. Lastly, I'd like to thank again Stephen Fry. He was the instigator of the initial trips, and he was also the person who submitted the grant application that we received for from the NSS to purchase the gear that we were able to use, and will continue to be used for many years to come in the Kong area of the Tiger Cave system. So I'm grateful for Steve for his friendship and for his hard charging attitude and efforts in this project. And lastly, thank you all for your time. As always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, and I am glad to answer any questions you might have via email or other communication. Thanks again.